All righty. So we are looking at chapter 8 of our CNC materials, certified nutrition coach materials, right? We're going to work our way through talking a little bit about food preferences and influences. If we know, we've talked a little bit about our population so far. We know that heart disease and diabetes and obesity and hypertension and all of these different conditions are common problems. We know that they are, related to our diet, right? They're not necessarily always directly caused by diet, right? But we know there's definitely like a correlation there, if not a causation. Um, and so like now we have to kind of look at it, it's like, well, okay, well then everyone should just eat healthier, right? Like that's the solution. Like, why don't you just eat healthier? Um, that's a pretty dumb question, if you ask me, right? So we gotta get a little bit more clear about, what it is we're looking for in like these actual influences and preferences and stuff. So a person's diet is due to a lot of different things, right? Like their diet, their food choices could be due to age, socioeconomic status, your geographic region, culture, and then there's like sensory elements, your taste, your texture, your smell. Daniel, you and I, we were talking yesterday, onions are the worst, right? Hard opinion, I know. I'm sure I've offended some of you. Can't stand them personally, and it's to be fair, that's not actually true if you cook them up enough to where like they get really sweet and like kind of release some of their sugars and stuff. And if they're really mushy, like I can totally get behind an onion. That's fine. But people always put like crispy onions on stuff. I'm like, it's the worst. I can't stand that crunchy sensation. It's the texture that drives me crazy. The smell, the taste, all that stuff is fine, but I'm a weird texture person. Like that is true of like how I also can't stand things like lettuce. I think lettuce is the worst. I know I know it's blasphemous to say when I'm here teaching a nutrition class, but I can't stand it. The leaves are fine, but the stocky part, like that crispy little bit, like iceberg lettuce is my nightmare. But I like spinach because spinach is like, it's got such little thin stems, like that's totally fine. So again, like weirdly like a texture thing. Um, and then there's taste, there's certain tastes that some people like. And, so there's a lot going on when it comes to like food influence, right? It's like, I'm sure any of my parents in here, you're trying to get your kids to eat healthy. And it's like, all right, we're going to do this. And they're like, no, we're going to do chicky nuggies. And it's like, oh, we can't do chicky nuggies every night for dinner. And it's like, kids are like, why not? It's amazing. Have you had them? So there's a lot kind of at play here when it comes to our food intake choices. So our learning objectives today, we want to explain nutritional intake and how it is related to our health, identify the roles of like how our dietary habits can kind of shape and affect our health, some of these environmental and social influences, right? One of my favorites, you think about like just like a social influence, Starbucks, man. Do you guys know, this is a fun little fact for you. Did you know that the Starbucks in Beverly Hills, the one that's like there, like near the Beverly Hilton, um, that Starbucks loses money every day. So, you would think of Starbucks and you're like, yeah, it's a really successful company that makes a lot of money. Yeah, oh, absolutely. Like Starbucks as a company does. The Starbucks location in Beverly Hills, Beverly Hills is friggin', Beverly Hills. Like rent there is extremely high. They do not make enough money every day to cover their expenses. Employees and rent cost more than that money than that location makes. So the company actually eats the cost every day in Beverly Hills. Why would a company agree to do such a silly thing? Because like they are influencing people in that area, which Beverly Hills is a very wealthy area. They're influencing them to develop, I'm going to use the word addiction, but habits, right? To going to something like Starbucks. There's something about that green straw, that everybody kind of goes for. That's a social influence, right? It puts you as part of the in group, right? Which is kind of interesting. So, it's very funny to me. Like that's one of the things about Starbucks, right? They've done a really good job of like branding themselves, and so when you think of coffee, it's almost like that kind of jumps into a lot of people's brains. Yeah, because it's sort of like part of the identity. I mean, let's do that. Let's look up. Let's see if I'm how powerful this is. So I'm just gonna look up cup of coffee, and we're just gonna take an image here. Okay, like yeah, those are our regular coffee mugs. This didn't go the way I thought it would. I was assuming we'd see a lot of this, right? The kind of classic like to go mug. And we'd see the like star, I assumed that like the internet was gonna have a lot of pictures of Starbucks green without like a fake Starbucks logo. But yeah, maybe not as much, but still like it's very much an influential company. They're very much benefiting from that. So that's a social influence, right? We want to talk a little bit about dietary patterns, like certain things that are going to influence those dietary patterns. Recognize the danger of the whole one diet fits all approach. I think I talked a lot about this yesterday, talking about like information and stuff. Anecdotal information is definitely our lowest form of valuable information. We don't really love just relying on anecdotes alone. But that doesn't mean that anecdotes are not an example of like something that truly did happen. Same thing with expert opinion, right? I always warn people about expert opinion because, like, experts are experts on the things that they are experts on. And I know that's a very, very weird sentence. What I mean by that is like experts are always going to have an opinion on the things that they specialized in because that's what they specialized in. You're likely to find what you're looking for. Doesn't mean it's bad information, right? Just means that there's sort of an implicit bias there that sometimes we don't we don't develop awareness of. So the same thing is true of diets. Like if you have a client who has been on a specific type of diet before and it's working for them, and I mean actually working, not like, yeah, I lost 5 pounds in a week, it was amazing. That's not working, right? Because now they're right back to where they were. But if they have a diet that's like been successful, they're on even if it's something like carnivore is like my least favorite diet right now. Because it's like the popular one. And I'm always really cynical of whatever diet is like popular at the time. But like, and carnivore is a great example of something I'm really worried about. But somebody's on carnivore and they've had success on it, their blood work is fine and healthy and they're doing great. Why would I change it? If it's not broke, why would I want to change it? So we're going to talk about the danger of one diet fits all approaches, where if they do believe that that's like the approach and everyone should do it, it's like we want to kind of get away from that. Doesn't mean that it's impossible. It just doesn't mean it's likely. And then we want to identify like certain demographic factors that influence our dietary behaviors. So we're looking first. We got to start with first we got to look at like defining health and disease, right? So talking a little bit about talking a little bit about like what an actual disease is really quick. So this is already in your standard NASM textbook. You guys have kind of seen this in chapter, I think it's in chapter 2. But we're going to define like health, right? As defined by the World Health Organization, is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So I like that definition a lot. This is in your standard textbook. You guys have read this before. But when we say something like somebody is healthy, right? Just because you are not dealing with like a disease or a condition directly and it's not affecting you on a daily basis doesn't necessarily mean we are healthy, right? And I like that. I think that that's really good because that tells us to kind of strive for more than just the bare minimum. It's funny, man. I'm not gonna go around and say like Kaiser Permanente is the best company in the world, but like Kaiser has like a really good phrase kind of related to this. It's almost like a part of their marketing is like, they're like, oh, well, the World Health Organization is going to say it. We're going to say it. But it's like human beings were not designed to simply survive. We were designed to thrive, you know? We were designed to actually do well. And so that's what we want when it comes to health, right? So obviously it's a condition that shifts all the time. You know, you catch a cold, you don't feel great, right? And so it's an ever-changing condition. You have good days, you have bad days, right? But it's based both on, you know, your ability to sort of adjust to internal and external situations, right? I would argue that like if you are somebody who feels really good, you know, regularly, and then like something really stressful happens in your life, but it kind of washes off your back, I would say that's a really good example of like a healthy individual, right? They're not dealing with like that, you know, they're not letting that stress kind of bog them down and, you know, affect them in really negative ways out of nowhere, right? That is something that I would argue is a good example of like health, being healthy, right? But if you're like, no, I'm doing great. Like I feel really healthy all the time, right? I'm up, I'm moving, I don't have any aches and pains. But then like, you know, you're late for work or something like that, and you're just having an absolute meltdown and your job is stressing you out and you just have like a really bad day. It's like, you okay? Did you wake up on the wrong side of the bed today? And it's like, well, yeah, but you know, this project just got me bogged down, really stressed out. Right. And then like, you know, then they have like a really high the next day and then like a really low the next day. It's like, ugh, I don't know that that job is healthy for you, you know. We were talking about, oh my gosh, we were talking about this around the Super Bowl recently. My buddy Owen, I don't we have a Ravens fan in here? Um, Speak up if you're a Ravens fan. But my best friend is a huge Ravens fan. And you know, he got kicked out by the Chiefs, you know, in the championship game, and then you know the Chiefs go on to the Super Bowl, won the Super Bowl this year. Spoiler alert, if you haven't watched it yet. You know, it's just like he was just so upset, like he was like depressed, you know, and it was like he's like, I love football. And I'm like, I'm not sure football loves you. You know, like, so that's kind of what we mean when we talk about like health, right? It's not just like it's like, would you describe him as healthy? I mean, like I yeah, probably would, you know, but if that's like really affecting other parts of his life, it's like, oh, I don't know, buddy. Your ability to adjust to changing environments, you know, again, like dealing with like the stress and things like that and adjusting really quickly. That's a good example. And then obviously, like it's kind of the same thing. But pathologies as well, right? Like again, like we do want to see the absence of disease. That is part of health. It's just not the only definition of health, right? We also want to have a certain amount of like resilience in the face of certain adversities and stuff. And so I love that. I think like health is a really good example. When we're talking about health, it's like, look, it's more than just like you don't get sick a couple times a year. It's more than just like you don't have any medications that you're on. You know, if we want somebody to be healthy, right, we want you to, you know, not have any symptoms of any of these conditions and things like we want you to thrive, you know, not just survive. So you can kind of see here that like if we have this sort of spectrum of health, we're break it down into just three simple phases. Obviously, it's more complicated than that. What is that? That's so weird. I don't know if my stop. I can't tell if like my computer's touching my speaker wire or what, but it's like um so we've got like, you know, full-blown like pathological like disease. It could be dealing with, you know, several different conditions that are actually like chronic pathological disease. It's something less greater than 6 weeks is what we're talking about here. And then there's like the transition zone, which is usually where honestly, a lot of people live, you know, heart disease, yes, right? They, you know, maybe pre-hypertension is a good example, or pre-diabetes, right? Which are two terms that like are not, they're medical terms, but they're not diseases. You know what I mean? Like they're not, it's like pre-hypertension really isn't harming you in any way. It's not that much, you know, your kidneys are able to actually kind of keep up still at that level. You're not getting kidney damage or anything like that, but it's a sign that like you're struggling, right? And you're probably not going to notice anything with pre-hypertension, but it is such an early warning sign of like really severe stuff to come. It's like, of course we want to address this now, you know? So many people like live in this, or just like malaise and fatigue, right? I definitely am gonna have like a power outage, like in the next like week, right? My wife and I are working crazy. I mean, she spent all day yesterday like getting this place set up and working so hard and all this. And like me, I was like, lifting furniture a little bit here and like coordinating the movers and stuff. Um, but like, there's still so much more to get done. Right? Like we've got to unpack, we got to like, we got to decorate, we got to do all these different things. We got to find a washer dryer. If anybody knows washer dryer, by the way, that somebody's getting rid of, gas dryer, please. Let me know. Uh, so we got like, these are things that are, are stress. I gotta refinish our dining table because we want to put it in a new color. Um, a lot to get done. Um, and I'm definitely gonna have a power outage. I'm definitely gonna I'm gonna hit like Sunday or something, and I'm just gonna, I'm gonna need 2 hours on my phone, just like scroll, 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 accomplish nothing, scroll, 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 turn my brain off. Like that's a little bit that if I were experiencing that regularly, right? Like, and just this general like fatigue and malaise and things like that, that is way more severe. If you feel that you are having days where it is hard for you to just even get yourself out of bed, and things like that, that could be a sign that like something in your life needs to be adjusted for health. And that's something I try to remind my clients of all the time, right? It's not again, I don't want you to survive. Sounds horrible. And I just walk away. I leave that. No, I don't want you to survive. I want you to thrive. I want you to be, the best version of yourself and stuff. So we quickly defining, like we got our definition for health here. Let's go ahead and define disease as well. Right. We're going to define this as any abnormal condition that negatively affects the structure and or function of a part of the body, right? So disease is going to be is even just a little bit of just aches and pains. Now I will say, like, if you're talking about like a part of the body, I wouldn't call like spraining your ankle a disease, but here's the thing: if you've got chronic ankle sprains, right? If that's something that you deal with and like it's interrupting your ability to play sports or do these things that you like, these things that make you feel in life like you are thriving, let's do something about that, right? Like, why are these chronic ankle sprains happening, right? Chances are it's because it happened once, bad luck, or it happened once because of maybe like altered posture, things like that. But the thing about ankle sprains, it's such my kind of my go-to example a lot of times, because like when you experience an ankle sprain, you take 6 weeks off and your ankle heals up fine as long as it's not like a really severe sprain. But you take a couple weeks off, but that 6 weeks you're not pushing in with your glutes, and you develop a little bit of like glute weakness, particularly in the gluteus maximus, because that's primarily responsible for hip extension. You experience that, and now like that glute is a little bit weaker, so you're not as good at hip extension or hip external rotation. So the muscles that do hip internal rotation, they're like, all right, well, if you're not going to pull, I'm going to keep pulling as hard as I want to. And they start to develop a little bit of overactivity. So now you've got underactivity in one spot, overactivity in the other, and your posture starts to shift. This is such a slow process, we don't really notice it. What are you paying attention to? You're paying attention to your ankle because it hurts, right? Like why you're walking in a way that feels different. So now you're doing that, and then you're also kind of shifting into your other side, right? Putting more weight into your other hip. And so you hear people, and it's like athletes, professional athletes, right? And they get the same types of injuries kind of over and over and over again. It's really common, It's not anybody's fault. It's just kind of how our body works, right? Biologically, you use something a lot, you get really good at using it. So I wouldn't necessarily call it ankle sprain disease, but I would call, if you're dealing with like pronation distortion syndrome, I wouldn't necessarily call that a disease either. It's got the word syndrome in it, but if you're collapsing your feet in, or maybe even just on one side, you get a little bit of knee valgus and stuff, like that is going to 100% affect 100% affect your posture. And like now you're everting your foot more consistently. So that ligament on the lateral side of the ankle is used to being this length, and now it's supposed to be this length, but it's used to being like this. And then all of a sudden you roll your ankle one day, you try to stretch it to this, which is a length it should be able to deal with, and it can't deal with it. So again, like aches and pains, guys, they're not a normal part of life. Let's get rid of that. Like I don't want you or my clients or me to have those regular aches and pains. Let's get rid of those. What's that? Uh-oh, what happened? I hit a button that did I make my computer just talk to me? Or am I just going crazy? Either way, not good. So disease can affect one specific part of the body. It can affect one area of the body. It can be acute or systematic, chronic by that. It may be caused by external conditions. And usually we are going to break it into either communicable or non-communicable. I'm not going to put that one up here because it's not super relevant to us. But, communicable diseases, trainers, we're not really here to deal with that. We want to try to avoid them, but that's definitely not something we're sort of working in. But chronic conditions that are non-communicable that we sort of develop over time, very much a thing. So we look at like sort of this chart here, right? We see like the leading causes of death, right? Now we've got all of our leading causes of death here. Heart disease coming in on number 1, right? We are seeing over 600,000 deaths kind of consistently there. Back in 2013, that number, oh no. I forgot NASA always uses these. I'm sure they do it because like the data has been around so long that it can be consistent, but sometimes it doesn't paint a picture. How many deaths, heart disease in, we'll say 2022 instead of 2023, just in case they don't have that data yet. So 699,000. So we are up 100,000, which doesn't sound like it's as much, but let's think about that. Yeah, that's a 15% increase. Don't love that, in let's see, 2022. So that's in 9 years. So yeah, definitely something we are trying to avoid, right? So lots of different conditions here. Now, in terms of like preventable things that are habits related to this, look at tobacco smoking, guys. It's causing a ton of death every year. Look at obesity, overweight and obesity, right? It's having like major impacts on us every single year. So these are things that we can do to combat. We can change our habits around tobacco usage. We can combat obesity through diet and exercise, right? We can limit our alcohol consumption. Infectious diseases, look, like there's not much you can do about that, right? Like infectious diseases, wow, you can clean a little bit better, but you're covered in germs right now, sorry to say. But like that one's not big. Toxins, those are if you get exposed to something, I mean, you can be more careful, wear like a freaking respirator or something. That is advice for me, by the way, because I'm going to work on this new dining table. I gotta go buy a new respirator. Motor vehicle collisions, right? Like firearms deaths. I mean, somewhat preventable, but still not so much. There's a lot of things that are not necessarily as preventable. But look at these 2 major categories here, right? Tobacco and overweight and obesity and alcohol, like these first 3, right? Those are things that like we have a pretty decent amount of control over in a world where we don't always have control over everything. So we should probably take as much of it as we can. Let's look at this idea of like wellness, right? So wellness, we're looking at a slightly different kind of topic here, right? We're talking about trying to be as well as possible. And like, this is going to feed into our health. We have these 6 major dimensions, right? There we go. That we did it. We got a full class. So our 6 dimensions that we're going to see, right? We've got emotional, right? We want to have like emotional wellness. We want to feel that like we have control. Our emotions are not, outside of our control. If you feel that you are, I get so this is funny because I'm about to say I get angry. But I get angry, I get upset, I get annoyed at like the idea that like this like very marketed idea that like women are the more emotional of the two sexes. That drives me nuts sometimes when I hear that because I'm like I go off the handle like when I lose my temper, right? Like I don't want to hear it when like some guy is ranting and screaming at the top of his lungs, like just livid. And then like they're like, oh, but she's crying and that makes her more emotional. It's like, for the record, you are extremely emotional. I accused my dad of this one time because my dad will sometimes like go off the handle, and I was like, he's like, I was like, you dad, you are extremely emotional, and don't have a great grasp or control on it. I know it's the same thing with me. We all have this, right? But like that one is like one that like always drives me a little nuts. But if you are consistently flying off the handle, something in your life is at play here. You need some version of like stress relief. You need some version of like an outlet. Exercise is a really great way to deal with that. And food is an incredible way to deal with that as well, actually, because the more balanced you are in your diet, the less likely you are to experience things like good old hanger. Anybody in here a hanger monster? I am definitely a hanger monster. If I haven't eaten in a couple hours, I will kill you. Is what it feels like sometimes. I want a meteor to hit the earth when I'm hungry. I'm just frustrated. And so, that's definitely like something that like when it comes to wellness, it's like I need to make sure that I consistently eat at a regular interval, which I do. I try to take pretty good control of that. Snacks are this. I'm a big like snacker. There's also like occupational. Um, right? You should have a good work-life balance. That is a big part of wellness. This is something that I tell my clients. I'm like, look, I am your trainer. I'm not going to give you advice on like getting into a new career or things like that. But like, if you're telling me that you cannot get a little bit of physical activity in during your day, we should probably find a way to at least meet halfway on that, right? Like well, I'm not saying you have to go for a 30-minute walk in the middle of your day and interrupt your work day, but if you can just get up for 5 minutes, take a lap around the office, sit back down and continue your work, I can almost promise you, and I've done this a lot, by the way, with a lot of clients. I can almost promise you that you are going to be more focused. You're going to feel a lot better when you get back to your desk. We take that one step further into throwing a couple stretches your way in the middle of the day to deal with that upper back tightness and upper cross syndrome that we're suffering from, right? Or we take just a minute to maybe another couple minutes at some point during the day, maybe do a flight of stairs or something, get your heart rate elevated and come back. It result in more productivity. I hear this every time I do this stuff. I bring it up and my clients will all roll their eyes because it sounds, look, I get the way I sound when I talk about stuff like this. I am fully aware of like, it's like, you want me to be the weirdo in the office who like gets up every hour on the hour? It's like, what a weird thing to do. I know. I would argue that it is way more weird that we sit in front of like LCD screens for hours upon hours at a time, instead of being the biological hunter-gatherer that we are. I would argue that that's way more weird. But I get it. I know that this isn't always the most convenient thing, but it can have a major positive impact. My massage therapist, guys, like your job is physically demanding. I was sat in on a meeting the last week with our advisory board, and they were talking about like the lady from Massage Envy went on this like big tear where she was talking about how when the company first started, they would just block their sessions back to back to back to back to back to back. And now they have these like mandatory breaks put in there, and they're like, some massage therapists are frustrated by it because it means they make less money per shift overall, and others are really grateful for it, because obviously it gives you just a minute to like recover and have time, and like the quality of your work is going to be greater, and I'm sure, I will say, I know if you work at massage, I'm sure you're like, yeah, we could maybe use some more break, because from what I've been told, that they have a pretty grueling pace there sometimes, um but still,
I'm sorry.
what's that, Elena?
I disagree about breaks because most of the time, like except for that 15-minute break and 30-minute lunch, we get only 5 minutes to switch between clients.
Yeah,
And that's very uncomfortable because 5 minutes it
yeah.
takes only for client to get dressed. And
Mhm.
then like you have to be frustrated another 2 to 3 minutes at least if you fast enough to redress the bed.
Yeah.
And like I prefer I like to have 10 minutes between each massage and 30-minute break. That's it.
Yeah. I like I was
But 10 minutes minimum because otherwise you're gonna be stuck.
yeah, I was gonna say I do wonder how truthful this woman was, or maybe like when she is seeing, through rose-colored glasses and stuff. But I did wonder how like truthful that is. But I get it, like when, at least what she's saying, like, is very true. Like the more time you have, like I'm sure the quality of your work is a lot better when you're not rushing into your next session or rushing somebody out the door because like, and I've been there with clients before, I've had sessions run long and I'm like, gotta go. Like, like, I'm sorry, I would love to talk about this, but I got a bolt. I got my next one. Like
How about if client falls asleep on your table? You said bye, they said bye to you, and then like you come back in 5 minutes and then you hear snoring.
you just take the sheet and you pull really hard.
No, you cannot do that. You cannot do that.
That's
You
how
have to
you
switch
out the
rooms if
door.
there is extra room.
But yeah, no, I mean, yeah.
But that's a little bit of exaggeration about breaks. Maybe she counted 15-minute break that they added because like this is a little bit, this 15-minute break actually compensates for what I'm losing in 5 minutes. So
I'm
that's all.
sure
Like
what
it's
she's
not even my
referring.
break anymore.
I'm sure she's talking about the idea of what is better, and like she's probably
Plus, she's a recruiter. She wants people to want to
yes,
work for the place. So
yes. But still,
divided by two.
assuming it's true, right? And I know it's probably not in reality, but that idea is a valuable idea, and they freaking should do it right. Because again, occupational stress, like that's part of this wellness idea. Your work-life balance, guys, it's valuable, it's important. Like, don't work yourselves to death. And don't and give your, and take perspective on that and carry it to your clients. Like try to lead your clients to not letting them work themselves to death. Physical wellness, I could talk about that all day. That's the one we are all in here a little bit, the most experts on. Um, uh, so we'll move through that one quickly. But yeah, you should live a life that is free of aches and pains. Social wellness is another one. This is oftentimes why people seek out personal training in particular, like, group exercise and things like that. My wife's really good. She's totally an extrovert. She loves, being around like others. That social energy like charges her up, and me as well in some capacity. I'm a little more introverted, but like she, it's interesting to like kind of see that, right? You get that like charged up sensation through like our social influence. And so, if you recognize a lack of that in your client, like don't be afraid to, encourage them to join up with a small group training program or a full-blown like large scale group exercise or boot camp or something like that. Like that can be a really great choice for something like this. Intellectual is another one. We are very much intellectually stimulated people. That is a really big one. Having that mental stimulation can be really, really good for you. Games, competition, little things like that kind of, those little brain teasers, they're fun. They're the kind of thing that can enhance your life, I've had clients, I used to have a client, I would only train him once a week as an older guy, really older guy. And he would bring in like a new joke every week, and that like became a thing between the two of us. I have another client that like he and I will get into. Actually, he's not a client anymore, but still in contact with him. And we have like pun wars all the time. Those little things are fun, and then types of things that you can throw into your sessions. Now, obviously, like the 1 hour a week you're working with somebody, or 2 hours a week you're working with somebody, a little bit of intellectual stimulation isn't necessarily going to be something that like fully enhances their life. But I always encourage my clients to enjoy a little bit of that intellectual stimulation from diet and exercise. That's one of the reasons why I love journaling so much. I'm like, let's look back. Like, do you see this number here versus this number here? Look at this. You shifted this really substantially. You're doing great. Like, take pride in that intellectual stimulation. I don't love powerlifting. That's like just true of me, like as a person who works out. I don't love powerlifting because it's just really long rest periods, and I'm not much of a rester. I'm not a relaxer. Um, that's not really part of my shtick, my personality. So powerlifting is just one of those things where I enjoy, heavy lifting. I like the challenge, but like the long rest periods are just not really my thing. But I remember like in times where I get really into powerlifting, I'll oftentimes use my journal, or I'll track it on my phone, and sometimes I'll even track it on like a little whiteboard that I have that I like to use. And watch my maxes go up, or watch like my new PRs and stuff. And I get a lot of like intellectual stimulation out of that. And so like while I might not be like physically stimulated as much by powerlifting, I like a little bit more boot campy endurance hit training stuff. I'm very much intellectually stimulated by it. So if you have run into that with your clients, don't be afraid to like find a new tactic to kind of, get them into that. And then spiritual as well. We have a lot of benefits from like spiritual wellness. Not speaking on to any specific ideologies or things like that, but I am not the most like overly spiritual person, just personally. But I love one of my favorite statistics that I think is just awesome, and I absolutely love knowing this. This is one of my favorite little factoids that I know. Is that versions of spirituality, no matter what they are, have been shown time and time again in like these different objective like case studies and meta-analyses and things like that. And they've looked at it and they've studied this, and they have found that it enhances people's lives. So me, whether or not I believe in things like astrology and signs and certain spiritual things, whether or not I believe in it, here's something that I firmly do believe, and I promise you that I believe in this. I do believe that it makes people's lives better. So whether it's true or not, if it makes your life better, I'm so glad that it exists. And that's like part of wellness. So there's, find, your version of like something that drives you forward. That's great. Like that is good for our brains. So different types of wellness that we've gotten. So again, we kind of see this wellness continuum here. This is really kind of where we've already been talking about. But again, when it comes to like, working through this, right? We have a lot of times where we're like working on like treatment to actually like we're in an emergency situation. Like if you're disabled because of this condition you're dealing with, let's combat that, right? You got that regular ankle sprain and it's not where your foot's not working right now. Good to know. Let's work on it, right? Like let's treat that as best we can. See your physical therapist, right? Then eventually, like it boils down to like symptoms. Like you're not quite dealing as intensely with this. This actually technically goes this way. I started backwards. But like combating those symptoms, and then eventually like signs, right? So if you got somebody who's dealing with signs, we're trying to catch that and put them on a wellness program that's going to avoid that condition, right? Symptoms and disability, same thing. Need direct combat over here. And then in terms of like keeping that stuff from coming back, it starts with awareness, developing that awareness. I know I talk about awareness a lot. It's something that I like, speaking of things that I find spiritual, like I'm all about awareness, that is, I am at the altar of awareness. And so like just conscientiousness and developing as best you can, journaling and being as aware as you can. It's just something that I think is really valuable, and educating and figuring out like, okay, now I'm aware that this thing is happening to me. let's talk about why. Like how do I learn what I need to learn about like how I got here, right? And then eventually we grow where it's like, okay, I've left this bad habit behind, right? We've all dealt with like those kind of things, and that you look at like addiction and stuff, and that's a really good example of it, right? Where does let's look at a 10-step program, right? So 10-step program, 12-step programs, whatever, but the most basic version, it always kind of starts with, hi, my name is so and so, and I am a whatever it is, anger addict, drug user, alcoholic, right? All of these different, my name is so and so, and I am, and it's what you're dealing with. Why? Yeah, we've all seen that in movies. Why do they always do? Like, why do they do that shtick every time? Like, what's the value in saying this thing about yourself and labeling yourself this way? The reason why is because most people suffer from being like, well, yeah, I mean, I drink every day, but I'm not like an alcoholic, right? It's easy to not let you're anti-labeling yourself. You're avoiding this idea of me. The first thing you need to do is like admit that, like, look, this is a problem that we want to work towards. So it starts there, right? That's the awareness. And then eventually, like, we work into these things where, the rest of the 12 steps that they're doing. Actually, let's take a look at that. Whoop, accept the reality. Yep. So again, like admitting it, right? And then we start working into like affirming this oh, that's like full-blown higher power. Let's just, I don't want to step into that as a lesson plan. That's a little bit better. Everybody's gonna have slightly different versions of all this stuff, but it's like, be with this, like the uncertainty that's like, yeah, like I struggle with this, and this is gonna be a hard journey that I'm on, right? Again, this is like very much awareness, but talking about like being like, this is gonna be a hard journey that I'm on. You look at that, and that's an example of like education, right? You are like, okay, this is gonna have, like, if you're like a drug user, right? You gotta be aware of the fact that like you're gonna detox and it's gonna suck, right? My mom, who is not like a drug user, uh, we're from Astoria, Oregon. It's a very small town. The joke that I used to say, and it's not funny, but is that the hospital in Astoria was never filled with doctors. It was filled with assassins. And it was a really bad hospital. Now they've revamped it entirely, and they fired all the leadership, and it's completely turned around, and now it's amazing, which is crazy. But I remember like as a kid going there and stuff, and like I had a broken arm, and like this doctor's like wrenching it around. He's like, well, I think it's already set. And I'm like, you didn't take an X-ray. Like, I look back on that now, which is just crazy. Like, you didn't look to see like where the break was or anything, just kind of moved it around a lot, hoping it would pop back into place. What an insane thing to do. Anyway, ranting. My mom was like really overprescribed a lot of drugs. She went to, eventually she was having so much heart problems with it that we took her to Portland, and her liver was shutting down. And their doctor was like, you should never be on these two medications at the same time. You should never be on these two medications. She was on like, my mom had this like giant like fish box full of medications when I was just coming out of high school. And it was killing her. And so the doctor was like, look, this is going to be rough, but you're going to come off of all of these. And her doctor like basically made her detox. And I remember my mom like throwing up and sweating and doing all the things that I saw in movies about drug users, because of like blood pressure medication, like, and because of like antidepressants, these things that had nothing to do with like, hardcore drugs, but like were affecting her in the same way. And her doctor, I remember being in the room with her, and the doctor being like, this is going to be the most brutal 72 hours of your life. And it was, man. Like, she was, she had chills. I mean, like, luckily it wasn't like, she didn't have like the addiction part of like drug usage, where she was like, I need these. She didn't feel like she needed these medications the way you would kind of normally get that. It's not quite the same. Um, but like her body was like adjusting. It was brutal to watch, man. It was crazy. Absolutely nuts. So, that just developing that awareness. So, and then we're going to honor this mortality, this idea, do the inner work. Again, this is all like in this idea of like education, right? Develop awareness, very much education. And then eventually we start getting into like growth, where it's like, let's develop some new habits. Let's combat these things directly. Let's move in, let's not passively avoid this thing that's making us unhealthy. Let's actively move in an opposite direction. So there we go. That's our big sort of introduction to our theme for the day. Let's take a few minutes, guys. Let's see, we'll be back at 9:53. And we'll move into our next section here. Next section of this kind of wraps up really quickly, and then we'll probably get into the next chapter even before the hour is up. But take 10, everybody. I'm gonna pause the recording. It's not doing that. Let's take a look at the role of diet in chronic disease. So we're going to go ahead and start off with a quick little video here. And talk about how diet's going to affect things. All right, so a little bit more of how your diet affects your brain, which is cool. But very relevant to where we're at today. Okay. Full length ad. Full length ad, but it's not the right size. Not the right resolution.
If you sucked all of the moisture out of your brain and broke it down to its constituent nutritional content, what would it look like? Most of the weight of your dehydrated brain would come from fats, also known as lipids. In the remaining brain matter, you would find proteins and amino acids, traces of micronutrients, and glucose. The brain is, of course, more than just the sum of its nutritional parts, but each component does have a distinct impact on functioning, development, mood, and energy. So that post-lunch apathy or late-night alertness you might be feeling, well, that could simply be the effects of food on your brain. Of the fats in your brain, the superstars are omegas 3 and 6. These essential fatty acids, which have been linked to preventing degenerative brain conditions, must come from our diets. So eating omega-rich foods like nuts, seeds, and fatty fish is crucial to the creation and maintenance of cell membranes. And while omegas are good fats for your brain, long-term consumption of other fats, like trans and saturated fats, may compromise brain health. Meanwhile, proteins and amino acids, the building block nutrients of growth and development, manipulate how we feel and behave. Amino acids contain the precursors to neurotransmitters, the chemical messengers that carry signals between neurons, affecting things like mood, sleep, attentiveness, and weight. They're one of the reasons we might feel calm after eating a large plate of pasta, or more alert after a protein-rich meal. The complex combinations of compounds in food can stimulate brain cells to release mood-altering norepinephrine, dopamine, and serotonin. But getting to your brain cells is tricky, and amino acids have to compete for limited access. A diet with a range of foods helps maintain a balanced combination of brain messengers and keeps your mood from getting skewed in one direction or the other. Like the other organs in our bodies, our brains also benefit from a steady supply of micronutrients. Antioxidants in fruits and vegetables strengthen the brain to fight off free radicals that destroy brain cells, enabling your brain to work well for a longer period of time. And without powerful micronutrients like the vitamins B6, B12, and folic acid, our brains would be susceptible to brain disease and mental decline. Trace amounts of the minerals iron, copper, zinc, and sodium are also fundamental to brain health and early cognitive development. In order for the brain to efficiently transform and synthesize these valuable nutrients, it needs fuel, and lots of it. While the human brain only makes up about 2% of our body weight, it uses up to 20% of our energy resources. Most of this energy comes from carbohydrates that our body digests into glucose or blood sugar. The frontal lobes are so sensitive to drops in glucose, in fact, that a change in mental function is one of the primary signals of nutrient deficiency. Assuming that we are getting glucose regularly, how does the specific type of carbohydrates we eat affect our brains? Carbs come in 3 forms: starch, sugar, and fiber. While on most nutrition labels, they are all lumped into one total carb count, the ratio of the sugar and fiber subgroups to the whole amount affect how the body and brain respond. A high glycemic food, like white bread, causes a rapid release of glucose into the blood, and then comes the dip. Blood sugar shoots down, and with it, our attention span and mood. On the other hand, oats, grains, and legumes have slower glucose release, enabling a steadier level of attentiveness. For sustained brain power, opting for a varied diet of nutrient-rich foods is critical. When it comes to what you bite, chew, and swallow, your choices have a direct and long-lasting effect on the most powerful organ in your body.
Okay. Where did I go? Right there. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the role of diet here, right? So if we could give, I love this like little bit here, but it's like if we give every individual the right amount of nourishment and exercise, not too little, not too much, we would have found the safest way to health. Let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. That second half is the part I like. Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, here in the US, like food is considered medicine, at least legally. And what I mean by that is like, this is one of the reasons why we as trainers, we are not allowed to prescribe specific diets to our clients. We're not allowed to say like, hey, I want to treat your diabetes by putting you on this low sugar diet, right? Now, all of that actually doesn't necessarily sound like bad advice at first, but it is very technical, right? Which is when we are not medically trained in order to do that. So a dietitian, a doctor, like those are individuals who are specifically medically trained to deal with prescriptive food, right? And that's not what we do. So, so just the rest of this is just going to be kind of some rapid fire statistics here. Like I said, we're going to wrap this part up really quick. But again, we look at like obesity in terms of like our definitions and stuff. So obesity, we are going to classify as having a body mass index greater than 30. Okay. And when we talk about that, it's like, so again, like body mass index, which we typically refer to as just the BMI, right, is going to be your weight in kilograms divided by your height in meters squared. So that is going to be our overall definition there. So 1 second. There we go. So we do know that having a BMI greater than 30, right? And then if we're classifying those BMIs, right, we want to remember that like we break this into different categories, right? So quote unquote normal weight is going to be a BMI of 18.5 to 24.9. Underweight is going to be a BMI is going to be anything less than 18.5. So that's going to be what we consider to be underweight. Overweight is going to be 25 to 29.9, and obese, again, is anything greater than 30. So this is one of those conditions and the leading cause of like preventable premature death, and definitely something we are trying to combat through generally diet and exercise. So when it comes down to that, right? We are trying to, get the mathematics of weight loss in alignment with one another. We're trying to make sure that we're, getting enough calories in to sustain the body, but not enough calories in to be converted into, more weight gain. We're trying to get enough physical activity in order to ensure that like we are able to balance those things out. So that's what we're talking about with obesity there. Now, from there, we also we also have heart disease, right? Now, heart disease is a tough one. I will say this is one of the reasons why that category is so large, is because there's actually a lot of things coming together, but they're all sort of like linked together, right? So a large list of conditions related to disease in the cardiorespiratory system, right? So there's a few things we can do that can help with this, right? Controlling your portion size is a really good example. Like again, like too much, we know that obesity is linked to heart disease because there is something that your body fat does that's very interesting when it is surrounding your organs, right? So particularly abdominal fat is the type that we are most worried about, and it can have an effect very negatively on our cardiovascular system. So we're working to combat that through maybe portion size, right? More fruits and vegetables can be really helpful here. Those have lots of like dietary fiber in them, which again is going to help with gut health and things like that. Whole grains, also very rich in fiber, is going to be really important. And then we want to watch the types of fats that we are consuming. Particularly when it comes to fats, we want to try to get our unsaturated fats. So there's going to be mono and poly unsaturated fats. Those are going to be a little bit better for us. Sorry, guys. Come on in. Those are going to be really good. Saturated fats, they're solid at room temperature. You can actually tell the difference. If we look at the difference between saturated versus non-saturated fat, the reason saturated fat is so bad for us, it's actually a pretty simple answer. They're generally considered our solid fats, right? Which is the type of thing that can actually clog our arteries. Sorry, guys, we're getting our utilities set up and we have no control over when they're here. So meats, cheeses, things like that have like that solid fat. That's the type of thing that's going to have that really negative impact. Then we have other things like choosing low-fat, good protein sources, like fish is a really good example, legumes, lean meat, and low-fat dairy products, because again, low fat means we're getting less saturated fat. Sodium intake. Now, sodium's an interesting one. Here's the thing about sodium. Like, there's actually, like, sodium does not directly cause heart disease. That's a really good thing, right? Like, sodium is not a direct cause of hypertension. But it is a particle that dissolves really well in water. And so it makes a solution much more hypertonic because there's more little particles floating in, which means it can actually pull things out and dehydrate you, therefore thickening your blood. So if you already have high blood pressure and now you have thicker, harder to move around blood, sodium can be really bad for things like your kidneys. And that's why kidney disease is related to like hypertension. But in terms of like having sodium in your diet, it's actually not going to cause, it's not really a direct cause of a lot of heart disease. It's kind of a misconception in terms of how it works, or at least we've learned a little bit more about how it works over the years. Other things you can do, you can plan and create menus ahead of time so that you're not randomly eating out or making bad choices nutritionally. And then don't be afraid to like treat yourself on occasion. Those kind of things are very helpful for staying on a dietary plan. There's nothing wrong with a little bit of a cheat day, we just don't want to go crazy. So, okay, those are all, we saw a big list of things that we don't want to do, but like, what about like other conditions, right? What about like, what about dealing with like different types of like cancers, right? This is another leading cause. And this is by definition, we'll say any of a large list of malignant neoplasms affecting tissues, right? So this is like basically the rapid growth of like non-functioning cells, and something we are trying to combat. So there's certain things that you can do that can have a major positive effect. Biggest one, guys, the best advice I've got for you, your diet should look like this. Just look at how much color is in this image on this slide here. The more color you can get into your diet, the better. We want to have antioxidants in our diets. Dark leafy green vegetables, oranges, purples, reds, fruits, vegetables, things that are really, 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 really colorful. Because the thing that gives plants their colors are these little phytochemicals that are not like, they're nutrients, but they're not part of our essential nutrients. Like, weirdly enough, like talk about like essential nutrients, you need your proteins, your fats, your carbs, your vitamins, your minerals, right? And water, right? Those are your 6 essential nutrients. Phytochemicals are not actually necessarily part of that list in terms of function, but they are hugely important. They are definitely really important for combating all kinds of different diseases in the body, because they actually have, you look at like their chemical structure. I mean, really zoom in here. They have extra electrons in them. And those extra electrons is what makes them an antioxidant. I got a picture of this? No, of course not. Looking at like how antioxidants work, here's a little image here, right? How antioxidants work. Okay, so you take a look and you will see right here we got a free radical. Right now, this is an unhappy little molecule here on the left that has an unpaired electron. It's looking for an electron from the environment. Right, and it will get it from anywhere that it can. If you are the environment and like your tissues are surrounding this, it can basically try to steal an electron from like one of your cells. And if that happens in your DNA, then your DNA's blueprint gets modified, and now you're going to create, a new blueprint that is ineffective, right? And you might end up with like a non-functioning group of cells. If that gets really aggressive, well, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about like, combating tumors and stuff. So we look at like an antioxidant, it's got all these extra little electrons, and it is more than happy to just donate those electrons away. So the more you can sort of bombard your system with these bright colors, the better it is. This is why you'll hear about like getting on like juicing diets and things like that, right? Is it because the juice is magical? No, not necessarily, but is really rich in phytochemicals and easy to get down when you're on certain medications that make it hard for you to have an appetite. Low glycemic index foods that are going to cause you not to spike your blood sugar so that you are keeping your metabolism working consistently is a big one. Increasing dietary calcium intake. Calcium can sometimes act as an antioxidant as well. And then again, maintaining a low body mass. That's a really big one as well. And that just, we go to, this is kind of a weird way to look at it. But again, like a low body mass means less you means less atoms means less likely to suffer from things. Like taller you are, like, it's actually why, these are weird fact, NBA players, in terms of professional athletes, they are the most likely to suffer from things like cancer. And it's because like they have the largest bodies, they have more cells. There's literally a direct connection to things like that. Then we got diabetes. Obviously, this is going to be impaired glucose control. Right. So this is going to break down into 2 different categories. Generally, the one we're oftentimes seeing a lot of is type 2 diabetes, which is a condition of impaired glucose control, whereby the body becomes insulin resistant. Right. So remember, insulin's job is to push sugar out of your blood into your cells. So if you have sugar in your blood, your pancreas will release insulin, and that will push that sugar out into your cells so that it can do, metabolic work. In type 1 diabetics, you're not making enough insulin. So it's a little bit different. So it is also a condition of impaired glucose control. whereby the body does not make enough insulin. And type 2 diabetes, the biggest factor that we generally consider is, again, going to be obesity. Your body is surrounded by tissue, and it starts to sort of take on its own metabolism and develops that resistance to insulin. Lastly, let's kind of look at our food choices here. So there are, again, certain factors that are going to affect food choices. We talked about this at the beginning of our lesson today, right? Biologic and genetic factors, right? You are probably absorbing similar taste buds. You are probably inheriting, I should say, certain taste buds from your parents. Okay, those parents, the foods that they like, you are more likely to like, but also like you grew up and are exposed to them. So you're also more likely to enjoy them that way, right? Not guaranteed, but like likely, sometimes it's sociocultural. So it could be like where you are from or your socioeconomic status. We do see more impoverished parts of the world are suffering from more nutrition related diseases than other parts of the world. And it's because like you won't see access to healthy foods. The what we claim all the time is that like healthy foods are more expensive. Is that true? Well, not necessarily always directly. There's a ton of really healthy things you can do for very little money. Rice is actually very healthy. Potatoes are really healthy, right? Certain like starchy carbs are really healthy. Certain veggies. Leaner cuts of meat can be really healthy if you're watching it. But I say all of that, and I'm like, yeah, see, it's totally cheap, right? It's not necessarily what I mean. I mean, you consider like if you are struggling socioeconomically, and you're working a lot of hours every week, like how are you going to have time to cook food? It explains a lot of times like why some people are, why we see obesity and things like that in these areas. Education is another really big one, right? We do see in areas where education is a little bit more limited, it's one of the leading factors that is not leading factors, a leading predictor of things like obesity. Age is another one. Obviously, like, with your kids, again, you want chicken nuggets, like chicken nuggets, pizza, and mac and cheese. It's why those are the things on every kid's menu at a restaurant, difficult to get kids to eat everything else. But sometimes people grow out of that and sometimes they don't, right? Geographical, certain foods from certain geographic regions. No, like I said, we already talked about biological. This has a significant impact on like your health, right? Income inequality, limited access to healthy foods, dietary habits. I mean, if you don't have time to go out and like exercise regularly because you are working 2 full-time jobs, that is absolutely something that is going to shift your health, for a wide variety of reasons. Then we see also metabolic rates. As we get older, our metabolism does slow down. Men are typically going to have a slightly higher metabolism than women naturally. So you can see these lines are a little bit different, but you can also see like the trends change pretty substantially with age. Like boys and girls are pretty much identical in the beginning. And then, around puberty, we see that gap kind of widen a little bit. It actually gets like synced up weirdly, like here, this is an interesting little drop there. But then again, we see like this widening gap where right in like the 20s to 30s range where most people are the most physically active. And then we just see like this kind of slow down over the years, right? And again, our metabolism just changes slightly as we get older. So your caloric needs change, right? You might need 3,000 calories a day when you're in your early 20s as a male, or 2,000, and then that gets lower and lower and lower until in your 80s you're needing close to 1,200 or maybe 1,500 calories. This is a pretty substantial difference. And then, like I said, economic status, that's a really big one. We look at the differences between like these 2 grocery stores, and you can see like this is full of like a lot of like fresh vegetables, and this is full of like a lot of processed foods. Processed foods, guys, they even take less calories to actually like digest because they're already processed. Your body breaks them down really quickly. So again, if diabetes is something related to like blood sugar spikage, well, hey, like the more processed your food is, the more likely you are to spike that blood sugar. And then the thermic effect of food is not that big a deal, right? Thermic effect of food is maybe 8 to 10% of your diet on average here, right? So how much energy you burn just by like processing your food, this little tiny part of this pie chart here. Most of it's your basal metabolism, 20% of it's physical activity, and really only about 8 to 10% of it is like burning calories from like, processing the food we eat. So your digestive system's not burning a ton of calories digesting, but it's burning some calories digesting. And if your food is highly processed, you could cut that pie chart down to closer to 5%. If you have a diet that's very rich in lean protein and fiber, well, maybe that part of the pie chart gets a little bit larger. So you can actually increase how many calories you burn every day. Not crazy substantial, but again, over the course of a lifetime, it starts to add up. And then there are also like biological influences. Highly processed foods, your body almost does not recognize as foods, right? So we know that like if your body is, experiencing like an appetite stimulating hormone like ghrelin, that is the hormone that tells your body, hey, it's time to eat foods, right? And if that one of the ways that you trigger ghrelin production is by stretching the stretch receptors in your stomach. Eating food actually tells your brain to release ghrelin, and ghrelin, I'm sorry, the opposite. Eating tells your brain to release leptin. Sorry, I'm almost on this side right now. So leptin is going to make your body feel full, and so that's going to slow down how much food you consume. You ever hear people say it takes like, you should eat your food more slowly and chew more slowly because it takes 20 minutes for it to reach your stomach or whatever? No, it does not. It does not take 20 minutes for food to hit your stomach. That'd be crazy if it took 20 minutes to get from here to here. However, what they mean to say is that it does take a little bit of time for your body to signal leptin production and stop producing ghrelin. Ghrelin, again, makes you feel hungry. Leptin makes you feel full. So it takes a little bit of time for that. Also, like if you have like different like resting metabolisms, that can also make you more hungry more frequently, or at least it should. So there is definitely like biologic factors at play here. So that is hopefully going to give you guys an idea of like why people are dealing with these different like biological conditions. Like why is obesity such a struggle? Chapter 4, right? Yeah. Why is obesity such a struggle? Well, that's a long story. Obviously, there's a lot of factors at play here. Any questions, concerns so far, guys? Any comments? How's everybody feeling so far understanding this stuff? Hopefully it's not just, oh, people are overeating and they need to do better. Do you have a little bit of a better idea on how all this is working? Excellent. All right, cool. Well, let's save this. And take a look at the next to this. I gotta let's see, stop the recording.